Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET. Additional funding provided by the Leo Cox Beach Philanthropic Foundation.
Caring about people is what I do. It's in my blood. And if they need a little extra care, someone with compassion has to do it. Why not me? This makes me a better mother, a better wife, and a better person in my community.
Winner of a New York State Emmy for Best Political Program. This is New York Now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to New York Now. I'm Matt Ryan. This past Tuesday, the frontrunners in the presidential campaign both had big nights as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton got a little bit closer to their party's nomination. We'll discuss that later on in the program when we sit down with MSNBC's Steve Kornacki to discuss the 2016 race for the White House. Before we do that, though, we're going to send it on over to my partner from the Times Union, Casey Seiler, who will moderate our Reporters Roundtable.
All right, and now for some analysis of this week's news, I am happy to be joined by three of the best. Two from Politico New York, Scott Waldman, who covers energy issues, Bill Mahoney, who covers campaign finance and ethics, and Karen DeWitt from New York State Public Radio. All right, Scott, it has been a bad month for natural gas pipeline projects. Two are now scuttled, but for very different reasons.
That's right. So the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline, which was about 400 miles long from the fracking fields of Pennsylvania to New England, was canceled by its actual developer just because of economics. There weren't enough customers in New England. That's what their reason was. Of course, it was also because of all the opposition along the pipeline route. So that was from the developers. But more interestingly, I think, is the Constitution Pipeline, 125 miles long, again from the fracking fields of Pennsylvania to Schoharie County here in New York. That was killed by Governor Cuomo, who has faced tremendous opposition over it. And it's really been watched nationally. It is a major decision, sort of an indication by the Cuomo administration that they're going to fight the fracking infrastructure.
This was a pipeline that had received all of its federal approvals, and really the state approval from the Department of Environmental Conservation was really the last set that it needed. Water quality issues ended up hanging it up.
And basically those permits are, in the past, have just been routine approvals. The state's job in the past has traditionally been just to work with the developers to protect as best they can the water bodies in the state and approve it. It's extremely unusual, unprecedented. The acting DEC commissioner told me recently to actually reject the pipeline the way they did.
Well, the so-called fractivists are still a big force.
Absolutely.
And I think Cuomo was worried that they would start dogging him again like they did for years over the hydrofracking issue. He couldn't show up anywhere in public without like a big crowd gathering. In fact, he took to giving his public announcements like an hour before he'd show up somewhere so they couldn't gather and start yelling. And he knew that that would happen again because they're still an active group. They played a role in the recently concluded presidential primary. Sure. Bernie Sanders was trying to get their support. So I think politically he didn't want to do it. And it seems easier to kill this pipeline after you've banned hydrofracking, exactly, which was the big decision.
In a blue state politically, there's very little to gain by approving a pipeline. And there's very much more to gain by giving in to the tremendous opposition.
On the other hand, though, lots of New Yorkers still use natural gas that comes from the fracking field. Yep. So the criticism is this is kind of hypocritical. We're using this gas, yet you're just not going to let it go through New York State or happen in New York State.
Are the Constitution's backers likely to mount a legal challenge that's been teased?
Yes, I would be shocked if they didn't. I think the industry thinks the reasons the DEC gave for rejecting it are very thin, and we'll see this one in court, unlike fracking.
Speaking of gas, there is a significant funk hanging over Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration
That's a transition.
Right now. Thank you. Specifically related to a referral that was sent in January from Risa Sugarman, the State Board of Elections Independent Enforcement Counsel, concerning what Sugarman found to be the coordination of efforts by de Blasio and his political associates and staff members in an attempt to swing certain key state Senate races in 2014 towards the Democrats. The de Blasio administration, de Blasio's attorney, has claimed that This is the type of practice that is completely legal, is done all the time, and the investigations, the subpoenas were issued this week, and the investigations are ongoing. Bill, you had a very good piece that was in Politico this week that said basically, despite the claims of the mayor's representation, this case is not exactly different from anything that Sugarman has brought in the past, has pursued in the past.
Not just her, but what we've seen by what types of behavior we've seen from political parties in the past. There have been a lot of instances in which parties have helped candidates circumvent contribution limits. If you're a candidate for office, you can only raise a few $1,000s from a donor in most cases, but a political party can raise over $100,000. So there have been a lot of incidents in the past where somebody gives to a political party and then the party helps a candidate who we know is supported by the donor. But what we saw with de Blasio is he used a lot of county committees. Usually state committees are involved in Senate races and assembly races, but he used a lot of county committees that have mostly been dormant for years and sent money through them and then these committees would instantly flip money to the Senate candidates that de Blasio was supporting, and we haven't really seen anything like that in the past.
Because the county committees, it's about $100,000, right? The
Yes.
limit that you can give, but to an individual Senate candidate, it's only about $10,000. So the argument is you circumvented the laws. I mean, I guess the key is, can they prove criminal intent? That they deliberately violated the laws, and that's what now the U.S. Attorney and the Manhattan DA, they are taking it seriously and are looking into it.
I don't think anybody from the de Blasio team thought at the time, let's go out and break the laws.
Well, that's what they got to prove, right?
There are so many ways to give money to candidates in New York where if they really thought they were doing something criminal, they probably, one, would not have been so open about it, and two, would have just used one of those other methods. We've seen a bunch of the unions, or the people who were involved in this primarily, they had super PACs running in the same election. There was no question that they could have given however much they wanted to them. But whether or not their thought about let's try to circumvent limits by doing this method, even if they didn't realize it was illegal, but they knew they were intentionally trying to circumvent limits, whether or not that holds is what we'll probably wind up seeing in the next few months.
Yeah, and there's those emails saying, when is the $60,000 check going to clear? Hurry up, we need it ASAP. Yeah. So there's all these smoking guns.
So in other words, it's almost like, is it comparable to the fact that other efforts of this kind have stopped right at sort of the cliff edge, whereas de Blasio's team is almost like Wile E. Coyote out in the middle of the ether, legs pinwheeling?
Usually it's a bit vaguer when something like this happens. You can't say that a check was directly flipped, like people gave to Governor Cuomo, for example, through the Democratic Party in the past. But oftentimes this money would just kind of come with a lot of other money and would be spent out over the period of years. It's not like we've seen any instances too frequently of somebody writing to a party and then the next day the party writing a check for the same exact amount to a candidate.
But this was grievous.
That's happened a couple of times to smaller degrees, but that's exactly what the de Blasio team did. And that's not questioned. Like we see these committees that would receive a $100,000, $2,000 check from a union who had never gotten money from a union before. And then the very next day they would write a $100,000, $2,000 check to the candidate they were supporting.
The other factor, though, is Sugarman, the investigator. She's Cuomo's appointee. She used to work for Cuomo. Cuomo and de Blasio are in a feud. So critics can say this is a hit job, there's nothing there, and it sort of lessens the impact of what she's doing. Although if you read through the memo, which I believe Casey has
well, through the good graces of our friends at the Daily News, including Ken Lovett, the memo was leaked, specifically the referral that Risa Sugarman sent to the 4 commissioners of the Board of Elections. Now, from the department of just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Does the fact that this document was leaked speak to exactly what de Blasio is worried about, the idea that he is being targeted? Because clearly this has thrown the mayor into a tizzy, into a real bad odor.
I don't know myself who leaked this. It could have been the Cuomo people, which probably would bolster his case. But keep in mind, this went through the full Board of Elections, and you've also got loyalists to the Senate Republicans, the state Republican Party on there. There's no reason to think that those people are big de Blasio fans based on what we've seen them say in the past. And it's just as feasible that it could have come from any number of people.
It also went to a lot of enforcement agencies and, through the U.S. Attorney Cy Vance's office.
Yeah, it's also 3 days after the concluded special Senate election to replace Dean Skelos, where the Democrat won. And Governor Cuomo didn't really do too much to help the Democrats.
It was written in January,
Yes.
leaked now, and it comes at a time when de Blasio just needs to begin ramping up his own fundraising for his own reelection, which is coming up in the not-so-distant future, and there's starting to be names floated by Governor Cuomo slyly
Ruben
for
Diaz
possible
Jr.
opponents.
is
Yes.
the borough president, is one of those names.
It also kind of helps neutralize the Senate Democrats when they go to raise money now for 2016. And Governor Cuomo, through his actions, has been more friendly to the Senate Republicans who have helped him with a lot of fiscally conservative issues that I think he worries if the Democrats controlled both houses,
Ceasefire.
they might go too far with some of the progressive items, even further than he wants to go.
Finally, here in the Capital Region in Rensselaer County, Joel Abelov, who is the Rensselaer County District Attorney, has been sued by Attorney General Eric Schneiderman after the death of a man on the bridge between Troy and Albany County. Basically a cop-involved fatality involving an unarmed civilian, which is exactly what the Cuomo administration was trying to kind of sew up last year with the governor's executive order that essentially handed the investigation of such cases and possible prosecution to Schneiderman's office. The DA in this case kind of got a little bit out ahead of that.
This is a great test case. This was why this law, I think, was put in place, to have an objective review in these sort of situations where, in this case, 4 or 5 days later, the police officer is cleared, but there's no video on either the cars or on any of the bridge or anywhere else for anybody to objectively look at this. This is sort of why Schneiderman and Cuomo brought Schneiderman in to review these cases.
Yeah, the civilian was drunk.
Exactly.
They
There's
accused him of being
plenty-
driving, and he fled, and nobody, really knows what happened. But he
pinned a police officer
Yeah, I mean, he
who
was
then pulled his
aggressive.
gun and
It
shot him.
sounds like, but the policeman
but that's
shot him.
again our only
Yeah.
our only evidence
Yeah.
of that is what is the word of the police officers, which in the past has not always proven truthful. That's why this exists. This entire review
And I agree.
process.
He wants to make it a test case and see if this executive order really does stand up in court, because a lot of DAs don't like it. They think it takes away their power to make decisions. They say, we know the police better than the state attorney general does, and we can make these decisions. Sure.
All right, fast moving in all three cases. Thanks very much to Scott Waldman and Bill Mahoney, both of Politico New York, and of course Karen DeWitt of New York State Public Radio. And now we will kick it back to Matt at the desk.
All right, thanks, Casey. This week we're asking in our poll question, do you agree with the decision by the state to reject the Constitution pipeline? Let us know by logging on to our website, nynow.org. Last time we posed this question, do you agree with the slower phasing in of the minimum wage in upstate? And almost 3/4 said no. Warren in Cohoes in northern Albany County said, if a minimum wage is going to be raised, it should be tied to inflation. It shouldn't be rising faster than the cost of living. James in central New York, I accept the deal, better than no increase. However, New York City and upstate ought to have had the same scale. And finally, Mike in Niagara County, watching on WNED, told us it should begin immediately and across the Empire State. A reminder, you can vote on this week's question at our website, nynow.org. While you're there, you can check out any of our past programs and follow links to us on Facebook, Flickr, and Twitter, where our handle is at @nynow_PBS. All right, we've discussed state politics. Now it's time to delve back into the national scene. A week after easily winning the New York primary, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump both had big nights this past Tuesday. The Republican had a clean sweep of races in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The former New York State Senator winning 4 of the 5 contests. Steve Kornacki of MSNBC has been following this race closely. He's the go-to guy for the network when it comes to delegate math. We had the chance to speak to him in Manhattan this week to discuss where the race to the White House currently stands. This has been a wild ride on both sides. A lot of people thought, it's great. He won't win in Iowa. Maybe he'll get a few votes in New Hampshire. But the ride he's been on is something else. First off, who could have seen this coming? I think a lot of people thought, it's great. He won't win in Iowa. Maybe he'll get a few votes in New Hampshire. But the ride he's been on is something else.
Yeah, I was one of those. I was as skeptical as anybody at the beginning, and I think there were some signs starting last summer that the normal rules of political gravity don't apply to Donald Trump, that there is something different here. He started doing things like going after McCain on his war service, where you would just expect any normal politician that does that, that's the end of it. And it didn't happen with Trump. And when stuff like that started to happen, I think I started to look at that, a lot of people started to look at that and say, okay, maybe we got some new rules here. And I think that's really the story of this. I think we've learned, just collectively, the political world has learned that the Republican Party is very different than we thought it, than how we understood it. And second of all, we're really just rewatching the rules of campaigning. They're being rewritten, right in front of us. Trump is doing, it's not just the things he says, it's how he runs his campaign, how he structures his campaign. The Cruz campaign has been a lot smarter when it comes to organizing than Donald Trump, in the way that we have been trained to say wins elections, but it's not mattering in this one.
You've tracked the pathway for Trump and the magic number of 1,237 delegates needed to secure the nomination. We've been tracking the odds of that actually happening. It was kind of 50-50 for a while. With the sweep he had on Tuesday, what does that mean now?
Yeah, I think the odds of him clearing that number in the primaries are significantly more than 50-50. And the big thing is, because of what the big night this week really suggested was something bigger has changed in this race over the last couple of weeks, where even if you took, fine, he's supposed to win the Northeast, these are supposed to be his states, he wasn't supposed to win by the margins he won by. And that tells you that there's a lot of there's a group of Republican voters who have come over to him above and beyond his base in the last couple of weeks. And I think if you play that out, I think we're likely to see that in these other states, in Indiana. And if he wins in Indiana, I think that pretty much breaks the Stop Trump movement. And then there's other states later in the map that set up really well. I think it turns what might have been a narrow victory in California for him into a big victory in California. That's a bundle of delegates. There are other states like Montana that we've sort of written off as Cruz states. I think those could become Trump states. So really, I think this ball is rolling for him now. If he gets Indiana next week, I think we're looking at he could clear 1,300 delegates in a good scenario for him.
We've heard prominent Republicans who have said they won't even go to the convention. McCain has said it. Kelly Ayotte, a New Hampshire senator, both facing a re-election. That's pretty unusual to skip something like that. Do you think it's because of their potential tough re-election battles, or is it because of potential bad optics?
Yeah, no, I think it's both. They're worried about, right now they look at Donald Trump, and you can look at the numbers now, and this is a good conclusion to make right now, that he would be a very bad general election candidate for the Republicans. And if you're running for a Senate seat this year as a Republican, right now you probably don't want anything to do with Donald Trump. The big wild card here is Donald Trump has basically already reinvented himself once to make himself the face of the Republican Party. The question is, can he turn around and reinvent himself again this fall? And maybe, and I don't have an opinion on this, maybe it could happen, maybe it won't, but maybe in a few months we're talking about Donald Trump looking very different to people than he does right now. People who jump on this, who just say, look at his poll numbers with women, look at his poll numbers with independents, he has no chance. I say he would have no chance if that election were held today. But if there's one person out there, I think, who could change himself significantly between now and the election, I think it's Trump. So I wouldn't write off that possibility right now.
Broadcast journalism has faced criticism from some. Wayne Barrett, longtime Village Voice columnist, saying they're giving him too much airtime at times, letting him call in, which is very unusual for a candidate to be doing that. Do you think broadcast journalism has suffered a little bit in allowing too much Trump? And he's obviously garnered a lot of ratings, whether it's for CNN or MSNBC or Fox, whoever.
I think the criticism misses. There's always valid criticism of broadcast journalism and journalism in general. I think what the criticism misses is people look at somebody being on television, somebody getting coverage in general, and they say that's automatically good for that person and automatically bad for everyone else. And I think the people who say it's been all Trump and we've been nothing but promoting him, I say these are the same people who are pointing out how bad his poll numbers are in the general election. And there's a relationship there. Donald Trump has gotten an incredible amount of coverage, and it's made him poisonously unpopular with the vast majority of American voters. The vast majority of voters who have watched all of this coverage for the last year have come to the conclusion at this point that they do not like Donald Trump, they don't want him being their president, and that if he is the Republican nominee, he would suffer one of the worst electoral drubbings we've ever seen. Now again, He has a chance to change that over the next few months, but this has not just been, coverage, fawning coverage that's made him, a saint in American life. This is coverage that's been very tough, very critical, and even when the coverage itself hasn't been tough and critical, just the things he said, just hearing it, just having it out there, the ban on Muslims, whatever it is, an awful lot of people in this country have heard that. They may be interested in it. They may want to watch it. That's what the ratings come from. That doesn't mean they're voting for him. Right now, the majority of them are telling us they're not voting for him.
It's a fair point. On the Democratic side, did the media underestimate Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders?
I think everybody underestimated Bernie Sanders. I think the ultimate skepticism about Sanders proved to be true in that I think we've seen there are limits on the coalition he's put together, particularly when it comes to winning over black voters, and I think that's the biggest single reason he's probably not going to be the Democratic nominee. But yeah, I mean, I think at the start of this campaign, you probably would have been laughed at if you said Bernie Sanders was going to come within 10 points of Hillary Clinton in Iowa or New Hampshire. And the fact that he walks away winning, I think he'll end up winning 15, maybe even 20 states if everything breaks his way. Nobody, I don't care what they say now, nobody thought that at the beginning.
Two more. We saw Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton come together after 2008. What are the possibilities that happens here with Bernie supporters coming over to support Hillary Clinton?
There'll be some holdouts. And I'm remembering in 2008 they called them the Pumas. They were the Hillary supporters who absolutely wouldn't go in for Obama, and I am sure we'll see that with Sanders. But I'm still pretty confident that Bernie Sanders at the end of this, he may wait. Hillary Clinton pretty much at the end of the primaries in 2008 came on board with Obama. Right. Sanders may string this out farther.
Sounds like he's going to wait.
Yeah, I mean, he may even get all the way to the convention, but I think by the time they get to that convention, I think they're going to get that photo op where he comes out on stage, they raise their arms together, he endorses her. I still think that'll happen.
And finally, if the matchup is Trump versus Clinton, how does the Republican win this? I mean, you've talked about the numbers with women voters. We saw what happened the other night, the Vine that's been going everywhere with Chris Christie's wife, Mary Pat, kind of looking like she was rolling her eyes when Trump said Hillary was playing the women card. How can he possibly win with these poor numbers?
I mean, I guess it's three things to me. Like, one is, does he start projecting a different image? And I know that's hard to you look at it now and you're like, he never could. All the damage is done, but people have short memories.
Mixed messages with that too. Sometimes he said, "Oh, I'm not going to change," and then sometimes he says, "Well, you'll see me act."
Right. And can he help himself? I think that's the other question. And even if he wants to, can he help himself? But okay, maybe he projects a different image. I think the ultimate wild card, and nobody knows this, no matter what the numbers say right now, I don't think anybody knows how tens of millions of Americans are going to react to seeing Donald Trump on the same stage with Hillary Clinton and have the two of them squaring off, for an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is. And if he comes at her with the kind of stuff he's saying right now, I think a lot of people look at that and say that's going to be that's political suicide for him. But we don't know. We've never seen it. We've never seen a presidential candidate get up on stage, a male candidate against a female, say the kinds of things that he's saying, not to her face right now. And I don't know. I don't know how the country's going to react to that. They may be repulsed and she may sweep almost all the states, or we may be surprised, because that's the thing we found with the Trump campaign. We've been surprised. And I think in terms of where he'd have to win electorally, I mean, the question would be, could he put states like, I think his coalition in 2012, after the 2012 election, it was the Republicans, if they want to win again, they have to be more diverse. They have to, more single women. Look, Trump's strategy would be drive up support among guys, white guys especially, older white people. Pennsylvania, Michigan, the Rust Belt. That's the question. Could he win some of those states? It's not so much about winning emerging voters in a state like Florida or Colorado. It would be the old Rust Belt states. Could he win those?
And finally, you followed the career of Chris Christie very closely over the years. What are the chances? Is he a possible VP pick for Trump, or is it too much Northeast there?
I don't think so. I don't have a good read. I feel like I don't have a good read anymore about what Chris Christie wants. I think the endorsement of Trump was, when he did it, I think the endorsement of Trump was about sticking it to Marco Rubio, because Christie blames Rubio's super PAC for his defeat in New Hampshire. I'm torn when I look at Christie right now. His governorship is kind of running out. I think he's burned a lot of bridges in the Republican Party nationally, and he knows it. People who a couple years ago were saying, this guy's our future, now they want nothing to do with him. So I think it's more likely he's going to play out the string in Trenton, go make some money in the private sector. That's what I've kind of been expecting. I think there might be 2 cabinet posts he'd be interested in. Just if you told him you could have, a job in administration, I think he would tell you Attorney General, maybe Homeland Security. The problem is, for a variety of reasons, I don't think he could get confirmation even from a Republican Senate, because there are so many Republicans right now who do not like Chris Christie nationally for what he's done this year. I don't think he could get confirmation of those positions. So maybe Trump would turn to him, and maybe everybody else is saying no for VP, and I don't know what Christie's answer would be, but short of that, I kind of expect we'll see him in the private sector making a ton of money and maybe being on TV.
All right, Steve Kornacki from MSNBC, thanks so much.
All right.
All right, well, speaking of Donald Trump, next week we'll sit down with the legendary investigative journalist Wayne Barrett. The former Village Voice columnist has covered the current GOP frontrunner since the late 70s and wrote a book about the real estate mogul back in the early 90s called Trump, The Deals and the Downfall, and it's now out in a new ebook edition.
Well, when the book came out, and I can't remember if he talked to me about it directly or my publisher, which is HarperCollins. But he said, I'm going to sue, but all you have to do is change the title of the book, get rid of the word downfall, and I won't sue.
All right, we sat down with him in the city this week, and the interview will be well worth your time. Speaking of time, we are out of it. We say goodbye today with footage from beautiful Prospect Park in Brooklyn. With Casey Seiler, I'm Matt Ryan. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on your local PBS station.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET. Additional funding provided by the Leo Cox Beach Philanthropic Foundation.
It's in my blood to get out there and help my community. It's here. Knowing that someone needs something done in the community and you're there to help them, it makes you feel really good. I'm very proud of the job that I do in my community.